CT. Okay, a very warm welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us this morning on the Unbiased News panel. My name is Priyankababu Jerry. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Hostwriter. It's a network that helps journalists to collaborate across borders. I'm also a freelance journalist working as a feature author and book critic for the German National Radio. And a warm welcome to our set of speakers. Next to me is Chen Sun. The sound is a little bit loud, hey? Let's try it like this. Next to me is Chen Sun, also freelance journalist. She works for the Chinese Phoenix Satellite TV, as well as the Hong Kong-based Initium. Then next to her is Wafa Al-Badri, also freelance journalist. She just created a community on Facebook focusing on empowering women at work. If you do speak Arabic, you have to join it. It's called Shul Sitet, or She at Work. And please welcome Brigitte Alfter. She's she has many different hats on here. She's a director of Arena Journalism for Europe. She's an award-winning investigative journalist. And we have to say that today her book, Crossborder Journalism as a Method, came out in English. Please, you all have a sheet on your chair. You get a 20% discount with it. Please get the book. It's great. I read it in German already. Highly recommend it. And I'm very sorry to say that we disobeyed the 3 speakers only rule. I'm afraid we do have a surprise guest. She'll join us via a video message. It's Priyankababu Jerry. She's also a freelance journalist working in India for foreign media, including The Guardian. Now, to get into the topic, and it's morning and we thought we needed a little bit of an exercise, we would like to start with a practical thing. So please, speakers, join me to the front. And since we are an all-female panel, well, we talk about diversity, so maybe this is when all the women are on the board. We would like to invite at least one brave male colleague, and Alex, just as I see you here in the audience, would you like to join us? Sorry, please come to the stage. Thank you. So what we want to, I have to change the slide. Yes, an applause. So what we would like to do is a journalism privilege walk. Please, Alex, join us in the back. And here are the rules of the game. Whenever I will ask 5 questions, whenever your answer is yes, you take a step sideways, not back. We had to improvise here a little bit with the space. So if it is a yes, please take a step to the side. If it's a no, please stay put. And here comes the questions. Number 1, did you ever miss a job opportunity because you were refused a visa to travel? If it's a yes, please take a step to the side. If it was a no, please stay put. Number 2, did you ever interrupt an interview because the interviewer started flirting with you? Number 3, has it ever been difficult for you to access high-level interview partners, like politicians, for example, because they felt your audience didn't matter to them? Yes to the right, no, please stay put. 4th question, were you ever not granted a byline because your colleague considered you as his fixer? And the final question, did you ever exclude a piece of information because it could have affected the well-being of you or your family? Okay, so we are all journalists, but we do see the world from a different perspective. And this is how we would like to open the lightning talks, with Chen giving us some numbers why this might actually be a problem. Thank you, Alex.
Hello, hi. Hello, everybody. I hope our little walk woke us a little bit. Hope it's more effective than cappuccino. Apparently you can't drink that after lunch here. That's a piece of advice we've been given. So I think as a group of the content producers, as journalists, we talk right now, we address the problem of racism in the content we produce enough as a topic. But we don't address the lack of racial diversity in our newsroom. So if we look at, for example, the English-speaking newsroom, and why that? Because most of the English-speaking newsroom, precisely in the UK and in the US, they do have international audience, which their content actually shapes the narratives worldwide. But if we look at their compositions of journalists, the number is quite shocking. For example, to the latest figures in the US newsrooms, only 22.6% of journalists and editors are of color. And if we look closer in the UK, it's a staggering number. Almost 94% of the newsroom are white. And if we look at these numbers, what the truth of the journalism is actually, you have to reflect on the community that we live in. And when it's not, we fail as journalists doing our job. Because when an all-white or exclusive white newsroom, it lacks of a different perspective to look at certain issues. For example, it's very common, very normal for an American journalist to cover the water crisis or pollution in Chile. Nobody would ask the question why you're here. But imagine if a Chinese journalist, a Russian journalist, Egyptian journalists are there covering a Chilean water crisis, and people were like, why are you here? What are your expertise? And that's have becoming a norm. And if white journalists covering the issues worldwide has becoming the norm, then we've been giving this assumption that whatever the English-speaking journalists are covering are actually neutral. But this is actually not true. No journalists are neutral. And no journalist has no blind spot. Actually, no human beings has no blind spot. So we have to tell us and tell other people that all of us are actually biased. And the starting point is to actually face our own bias, and that make a diversity in the newsroom very important, because you look at the world from a wider spectrum. So for the benefits of the content and for the benefits of readers and viewers, it's important to keep the diversity. And as well, it is actually a business and financial incentive, because according to a latest McKinsey study, that actually the newsrooms composed of diversities is more likely, actually 33% more likely to outperform on profitability. So next slide. So what we want to address here is that white newsrooms are broken newsrooms, that we need diversities in the editorial team. Yes.
Thank you very much for this first input. Chen is addressing the lack of ethnic diversity. I would now like to hand over to Wafa Al-Badri, who will focus on the lack of gender diversity. And just to give you some fresh numbers, the Nieman Lab was just quoting from 2018 that globally women represent less than 30% of leadership positions in newsrooms. But then something happened, right? We had the Me Too movement. So first journalists were covering extensively sexual harassment in the movie industries, and then we turned the spotlight and also observed our own industries. So Wafa, has anything changed? Like a women finally, or like with it came a whole new set of words, a new terminology, and Wafa will give us a brief overview of some terms we should know, and with the question, are women finally breaking through the glass ceiling?
Is it working? Yes. Thanks, Tabia. Before I answer your question, I just wanted to say a very few things, a bit correction. The group I founded is belonging to Deutsche Welle, so it's the German broadcaster for the international. And answering your question, well, we have been talking about the glass ceiling for women since decades, and finally, women are feeling that it's a Me Too era. We are having the chance to break through the glass ceiling and take opportunities. But unfortunately, there is a trick in there, because some companies and some organizations, while they are in crisis, they choose to put women on the top or on leading positions, not to give them the chance, but to let them face the glass cliffing, which is a definition made in 2004 by two professors from the UK, and that means that they put women in a very weak position, however they are in a leading position, because they face the problems, they have all the burdens on their shoulders, and once they fail, that's their problem, and if they succeed, that's the company's success. So we women in newsrooms and in the journalism industry should be aware about that. And talking about definitions, we need to, as journalists, because we have the talent to change words and to go around things, and we need to face ourselves and name the things by its names, and say the naked truth, so we can face it, we can address the problem, and we can go forward after that. The second definitions, gender betrayal and gender washing. And gender betrayal, I combine this from the class betrayal. Also in journalism, after the Me Too, we had our moment of Me Too, and then some women also choose to stand up for the aggressors, not for the other women, and we see that very clearly in the letter of Catherine Deneuve with 100 influential French women who denounced the Me Too campaign as a witch hunt. And then less than a year later, we see the French media Me Too moment when they have the Ligue de LOL, and we see a group of male journalists who have been using their journalistic powers for a decade, for 10 years, to bully and attack their colleagues. And we see also how that affects the female colleagues, and some of them even thought to leave journalism at all. And that's how it affects, and it's unconsciously biasing the newsroom and its atmosphere. So the problem here is people tend to believe women when they stand up for the aggressors, but not to believe them enough when they come out and they complain. The second thing is gender washing, and this is also made mostly by companies who want to get rid of this reputation that they don't put women in leading positions. So the first thing that they do after they have a Me Too moment, they take a woman, put it there in the leading position, but the dynamics are still there. The power dynamics are still playing a big role in that. So basically the woman is there. Mostly the women who take these chances are having loyalty to the old power dynamics, and also they got this position because of it, so they don't want to change it as well. And so to know that we have a problem with power dynamics, not only by changing faces and put women on the top. The last thing is mansplaining and career femicide. We might heard about the word mansplaining. Now, after the Me Too era, we also have mansplaining. And here in the middle, if you look, there is this is a survey by The Economist, and in the middle you see the question or the comment: women who complain about sexual harassment cause more problems than they solve. And we have November 2017, September 2018, and we look to women here in the second row. We have almost women like men are blaming the survivors of coming out and saying, and they say that they make more problems than the aggressors themselves. And this is very scary, actually, when we say that journalism industry is part of the society. That could also be applicable in journalism. This is very scary numbers. That takes us to the next definition, which I call career femicide. When you do mansplaining, women's blaming, journalism blaming, always for the survivors of Me Too, then you push them actually to career femicide, which is we saw already somehow happening with the French journalists who are considering the decision to leave journalism at all. So some people are killing the career of journalists just because they came out, they talk, or they support the survivors. Thank you.
In other words, it's a mess. We have
It
a
is.
problem. And actually, that's why at my organization we really felt this. We should investigate this more in depth. And this gave rise to a book project. It is called Unbiased, the News Why Diversity Matters for Journalism, where we want to A, look at the problem, and B, look at the solution. And I can't wait to hand over to Brigitte to come to a constructive perspective. Okay, what can we do with this? But let me briefly tell you a bit more about the book. It's a collaboration with Correctiv. It'll come out in September. We made a global call for pitches, and we were quite amazed by the amount of pitches, of how many people felt addressed by this question. Did you experience bias in your work? How is it affecting your work as a journalist? So we had like more than 120 really, really good ideas, and it was a very hard effort to narrow it down. Also, the editor-in-chief of this book project is here in the audience with us, Tina Lee. So if you have any more questions, please, she's very happy here to answer these questions. To really make sure to avoid some misunderstanding, this is not about misinformation. This is not about conspiracy theories that all journalists lie and we knew it, and like let's get rid of the baby in the bathtub. That's not what we want. We are really talking about, we want to highlight the effects of unconscious bias, implicit bias. Just a brief definition from the Oxford University Press. We are talking about distortions of experience by an observer or reporter of which they are not themselves aware. And what plays a big role in this are these social cultural frameworks, so ethnic background, gender background, and the cultural familiarity. That's no non-native speaker can pronounce this word. That makes us think, okay, this is how it is. But this is kind of my favorite piece of information that I found. How do we process information? We receive 11 million bits of information every moment through our senses. And consciously, I found different sources. The one was talking that we can only consciously process 50 bits. There was another source talking about 40 bits. So I think just by the sheer, if we don't want to die of data overload, we must exclude. We must be biased. Like, it's not the problem that we are biased. It's just the matter of do we all have the same bias? So the conclusion cannot be let's not be biased anymore. It's more like having a diverse set of people reporting on a story, because we cannot and we were talking this morning for breakfast, and like people who do receive this information and don't narrow it down so much, they are then sick, right? Like so it's to stay healthy, we need to reduce. And this is how I'd like to hand over to Brigitte, who is proposing what I think a very constructive and solution-oriented approach. What do we do with this mess? Could collaboration be a way of fact-checking the perspective of the reporter?
Thank you, Tabea, for the nice words. So I come into this group from a different angle. I come from investigative journalism, and I didn't start to collaborate with colleagues across borders because I wanted to surmount bias. I collaborated with colleagues across borders because they could get documents that I couldn't, or together we could piece together a European set of documents that I couldn't piece together on my own, because I speak Danish and German decently, but I don't speak Polish or Italian or so. So we started to work in teams to document European stories, European problems, European political journalism, and we realized our journalism became better through that. In this process of starting to collaborate, we all started to think about how we did it, which is this book which comes out today is a result of a summary of what we experienced in practice. How we work together is that when we work together, we actually do exactly what Tabea calls unbiasing. We shed light on each other's lack of knowledge. In investigative journalism, we use different words. We call it fact-checking. we are here in Europe, so I can use a European example. Many of you may remember there was the Euro crisis, where the German political leadership and the Greek political leadership were a little bit at odds with each other. And this was reflected in the media. This was reflected by the journalists who covered this, with a lot of finger pointing. So you had German media saying that the Greeks were lazy, and you had Greek media saying that the Germans were Nazis. And I mean, this is not a way of solving a European problem. So, my favorite example there is a team of 2 journalists, a Greek and a German, who were investigating a story about potential corruption, potential bribing, which occurred in these 2 countries. And they were educated, well aware of the situation. They were well aware of the political narrative. They didn't want to step into this trap of the political narrative. And still, the words that they used triggered sometimes the others. So they said, whoa, we had some lively discussions in that team about unconscious bias, as the cultural scientists called it. And so they tried to weed out this unconscious bias in order to do better journalism, because my claim is that our journalism will become better if we, within a cross-border team, shed light on each other's blind spots, on each other's habits. It's a very human thing to believe that the way I do it, it works, and it's probably the best way in the world of doing things. We have to surmount, and we can, in the dynamic of a cross-border team, we can surmount this belief that this is the best. We can realize this is my way of doing it. It's not better or worse than yours. It's just different. And so the dynamic in cross-border teams, in my experience, improves the journalistic product by taking the fights that unconscious bias results in, or by taking the problems that unconscious bias may result in, into an open discussion, cross-check it, fact-check it within the team before we publish. And then the moment we publish, we have a better journalistic product because we have addressed these biases before publication.
Thank you very much. I would just really like to stress this, like this whole approach. We are not talking about diversity as a form of political correctness. We are talking about quality journalism. I think it's very important to highlight. And also that the risk that we do miss out the story when people are too alike in the newsroom is very real. I just want to give 3 recent examples. Like how come nobody, or like, like how come journalists didn't see the financial crisis coming of 2008? There's many financial experts in the newsroom. How come nobody saw it coming? How come we were surprised when the so-called Arab Spring happened? Like if one is on the ground, has the local information, is it really a surprise that something like this was up? Or also talking from a German perspective, you know, the National Socialist Underground, when the story exploded, and it was a right-wing terrorist group murdering migrants. You know what German media called it? What was the headline? Don Air killings. So as if like this is just some feud among the migrant community that doesn't have anything to do with Germany. So I think risking out stories, which is the blood of journalism, and this is our societal task, is a real risk. Just to add this, it's not about being polite. I promised a surprise message, so we would like to give the final word for this introductory round to Priyanka. I do hope we have sound. So, yeah, okay.
Hi, I'm Priyankababu Jerry, and I'm a journalist from India and currently in India. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to Perugia, and that's because I'm on my dream assignment. I'm in rural India, in a state called Assam, and I've just walked about 1,000 kilometers with the 2-time Pulitzer-winning journalist Paul Salupek on his 21,000-mile Out of Eden walk that traces the path of human migration. And in the spirit of true collaborative journalism, which this conference is talking about, It's Paul who is making this video of me for you to see. Coming back to what we're talking about, it's fantastic to have conferences like this that are discussing about diversity in the newsroom and also in the way we tell stories. But here's a question for you. At what point does my identity of being a brown Indian woman go beyond this in the way that I am hired to do stories? For example, I'm always asked to do stories about gender issues in India, but I don't think an American Midwestern man is asked to do stories only about that region, so he's able to travel around the world. So I think while we do that, when we try to hire more people, it's also necessary to see that what I bring, because of my identity, is a unique perspective to get away from the dangers of a single narrative of a place or its people, because I see things differently. And I think that's the challenge if we want to have the multitudes of storytelling and journalism to ensure that the world is not one-dimensional. Yes, there are true stories, and yes, there's fake news, but then there are also those gray stories that we don't look at. And I think the only way we can get away from single narrative after we've done with the wine and pasta at a conference like this for you, I'm going for some dal and roti, is to really think about what we mean by diversity. So I may have saved all of you about 2,000 euros by not coming in there and missing out on all the fun. But then the real action happens after the conference is over. And I just have 2 words for that: hire people like us.
So we wanted to make this really interactive, and we will stop now here with the first round of introductory speeches, and we would like to open the floor to you. Any questions you have on the topic, please shoot. She's getting a microphone.
Hi, I'm Jasmine. I'm a freelance journalist. Up until recently, I was with Al Jazeera. But before that, I tried my luck in Germany, and I have a really colorful CV, let's put it that way, because I'm a person of color. And I found that in Germany, they didn't like it that much. They didn't like that I had an American education. They didn't like that I was all over the place to figure out what I wanted. And then I also figured that they asked me at one point, well, you can't have that job because you didn't do 3 or 4 unpaid internships. I'm not from that kind of social class. So in terms of diversity, I feel, especially in Germany, though, they're lacking behind in, there's a question coming, I swear, in not just gender diversity, but also people of color in their newsrooms, and social class diversity. Nobody who's, that creates elitist newsrooms, like that creates, so what's your experience with that? And in the newsrooms that you've worked in, like, have you, other than, you know, having an eye on gender diversity and ethnic diversity, have you had an eye on social diversity, social class diversity as well, which I think is super important?
So we will add the question of intersectional diversity. We will add this on the list. Anybody would like to answer? The question you're addressing is really the experience in newsrooms, so not how we feel about it.
In your personal work, have you felt a certain bias towards other people who may, or in getting a job, for example, like I have, because you didn't go through that classical elitist, sorry, that's my view of it, but elitist career path?
And I can maybe briefly talk about it. Yeah, I can sympathize with that, especially the unpaid internship part. I think
Yes.
everybody who ever studied journalism, political science, especially in Europe, might have all gone through that. And it's resulted, for example, UN institutions, they always give unpaid internship, and all their internships are based in Geneva and Vienna with the highest cost of living ever. But I think when we talk about gender diversities and racial diversities, it's already a layer of that is built in, because when we look at the education level of different racial ethnicities, And of course, I think in US this is probably more prominent, where the level of education is associated with where you're from. So I think it's already a layer of that built in. And I think another reason it's not so, let's say, put into the box is also, it's hard to calculate and hard to measure in that sense. But I do agree. I think it's also a big problem, and it's actually harder to solve, because this one we can put it out here and then, you know, hire more women and hire more people of colors. But how do you say, okay, hire more people with no college education? It's very hard to address, actually, even though they might be excellent journalists. And also maybe another slightly similar example is when you send journalists to different countries as a correspondent, and they will hire fixers, right? And a lot of these fixers, especially in South America, in African continents, and they never go through a journalist training. And then the newsroom would never hire them because they never have their portfolio, and then contributing to that, hiring them as a fixer, not journalists, not granting them bylines, contribute to that phenomenon. It's a vicious circle. So I think what you mentioned is actually very important.
May I add also something to that? Classism is there. You see it in the newsroom. You see it as a freelancer, especially working in international outlets or trying to work in international outlets. The priority always comes for those who have done these unpaid internships. Even if you work there and you sacrifice and you do the unpaid internships or whatever, and then you want to work, the better chances are always, most of the times, let's put it that way, most of the times are going to those who can afford to be relaxed while doing stories, not caring, I'm a freelancer, I'm gonna die from hunger, or I cannot pay my rent if you don't give me this story. So you really fight, and sometimes you don't get it, and that makes you really stressed. And those who are not caring about visa issues, like we are also in Germany, we are always caring about, like, I'm gonna renew my visa after 3 months, so I cannot travel for a 6 months long story, for example. It is classism is there, racism unfortunately is there, and we need to address it very clearly to be able to solve it.
Could I also add something briefly to the question? I really like that you brought it up, and also I think it makes it more. It makes it, you know, if it was just about hiring a black person to a newsroom and then problem solved, I like it like when it goes so much deeper. And also at the beginning when we made this little experiment, like we all had at least one question where we took a step to the side. So it's not so easy, this division. It's not this one woman will fix everything. It's many more layers. So I'm very happy that you brought it up for the sake of reductioning, making it easy. We skipped it out, but yes, it definitely has to be on the list as well.
Yeah, we need to change the power dynamics.
What approaches would you recommend for increasing diversity in the newsroom and convincing people who hold that power to do that?
Who wants to start the revolution?
I think, if I may, I think this is a long and slow process, and I think it needs particular attention. There are some examples in the UK, I think it's at the BBC, where they make particular efforts to ensure that, so they look at the journalism schools and how the division is there from different communities within Britain. And then they look at the jobs at the BBC and whether people get in there and whether there's the same division at journalism schools and in the young journalists at the BBC. And they could see that it isn't. There are more white people in the BBC than there are at the journalism school, or more people from, you mentioned class, from the middle class than from the lower middle class or the working class. And so they made a targeted effort to change the employment policy at the BBC and to encourage also people from minority backgrounds or from lower income backgrounds to actually apply with the BBC. And maybe if we take an analogy from women and gender, there are lots of studies saying that women don't have the same or don't display the same self-confidence when applying. So when you have a male applying, he would say, I'm good at all the demands of the employer, even though if you really have to be totally honest, he maybe fulfills half of it or 3/4 only. Whereas the women applicants would be much more honest and say, I can this and this, but I definitely cannot do that. I'm happy to learn, but I can't yet. And so it is such a complex issue to answer your question. So it needs a big and very patient, I think, effort on the side of both the applicants for positions and of the employers. And so it's raising awareness, bringing it into journalism school, but also bringing it into groups of media publishers, be that in the public service or be that in private, so that they are aware of it and make an effort and dedicate themselves to that. I mean, it's a win-win basically, because they can say, hey, we are doing so much in our newsroom.
I can also add a bit to that. I think if we want to solve it fundamentally, it's awareness. We have to change this mindset that a monolithic, racial monolithic newsroom is a norm. So by talking about it, by having sessions like this, and by being aware of the fact that there's a lack of diversity, I think it's the start of changing the mindset. I think it's going to be a long process, going to take a while. And from a more practical perspective, if you're editing the newsroom, for example, if you're a journalist yourself, when you're doing a story of that particular region, of that particular country, then try to work with a local journalist. Try to bring their story that they produce on the ground to the international outlet, give them a voice to speak and make their perspective seen by the entire world. I think that's a practical start, that being able to at least first start to make the content more diverse, make the perspective more diverse. I think then it gradually may be able to move up, giving these journalists a chance to write their content, and maybe one day they will be in the editorial team and actually make the editorial team more diverse.
I would like, if I may, to add a little anecdote also on to show the complexity of this particular matter of making newsrooms more diverse. I was a Brussels correspondent with a Danish newspaper, and among the correspondents, the Danes would get together and chat with each other and so on. And there was a major Danish newspaper who had an intern, a young journalist, a student of journalism, paid internship. And he had a Middle Eastern background, but was born and raised in Denmark and grew up with 2 languages, Arab and Danish. And I said, wow, you're bilingual, but that's an advantage. That's fantastic. Now you're here in Brussels and so on. And he looked at me, this young man, he was in his early 20s. He looked at me with bewilderment and said, you're the first person to say that to me. And I was shocked. Because this says so much about what he has experienced throughout his entire childhood. Even he was employed as a paid intern at a major Danish newspaper, working in Brussels to get the best start for a diverse newsroom life. And this was the first time he heard that. So there is so much awareness to raise on all levels.
More questions, please.
Hi, my name is Isabella. My question is, how do we avoid the issue of tokenization or blanket representation and just saying, because I have a woman in the workroom or I have a person of color, they can speak for all people of color, all women, all sexual experiences, etc. How have you dealt with that personally in your newsrooms, or how can we deal with that in the future?
Just briefly, the concept of tokenism, is that clear to everybody? Like singling out one, I hope I summarize it correctly, kind of the idea of like in the example of Brigitte, to say, oh yeah, we have to have more diversity, so we get this guy and he speaks Arabic, but the mindset, like, it's not recognized at all. It's like the face looks pretty on the outside, but it doesn't change the power dynamics. Or like he's there, he speaks Arabic, but he doesn't have a say in the newsroom. So tokenism kind of putting one person to say, oh, we are not racist, we are so aware of everything, but it doesn't change anything kind of as a consequence, like tokenism here, but not in the background. Who would like to answer to this really important question?
I would like to start with the gender part of that. Putting a woman, as I said, putting a woman in a leadership position or putting a woman on the top, that doesn't mean necessarily that women will be protected or women will have enough chances or women will have better work environment or work conditions because woman is on the top. The problem is still the power dynamics and how we women are growing up in their career within these power dynamics and they don't really recognize something else rather than that. And unfortunately, that change comes very, very slow and it needs lots of changes, not only the faces, but also how we deal with our problems, how we address them, recognition for these problems and trying to not only solve them from the surface, but we will have clashes, of course. Solving problems is not like, we know that this is a problem and putting a woman is also not the best solution, so we will put a woman and then we try to change the dynamics. It's not that easy. You need really to be revolutionary, destroy mostly the system that is there, build a new system, and that will have big resistance from so many people who are benefiting every day from this power. So that needs first, as Chan said, recognition. We need to recognize the problems, we need to address them, we need to call things by its names. We should not, or we must not be shy as journalists from doing self-criticism in our newsrooms and to address that very proudly. We have problems, we need to solve them, that's it.
Can I pass this question also to Brigitte? Once again, this is the French Revolution approach. I kind of agree, but do you see a chance that maybe like change within the system without waiting 100 years? Do you think that's realistic? Like, is that doable? What's your take on that?
Well, I think we all have to try all the time. My experience, as I also tried to explain with the cross-border collaboration, is that if the purpose of doing a newspaper or a broadcast is to do good journalism, and so if then the argument of improving the journalism, if these changes are built on the argument that this improves our journalism, I think then we'll have a much stronger argument rather than trying to invest a lot of energy in bringing down an entire system, which will take, it is a way to go, but it will take time and it is very cumbersome. And if you still go for the purpose of doing good journalism, there is a shared interest. And if you have a shared interest, this may be a way forward. But this is the classic of should we change the system or should we reform the system from within or from outside? So it's different paths to go.
More questions, please. Yeah, do we have a microphone?
There was two there. There's one there already.
Since very long time. Please.
Go on.
Hi, I'm Ros from the BBC. I do have a question, but actually just listening to you, I think I should respond to a couple of things that you said. I run a project called the 50-50 Project inside the BBC to increase women's representation. And what we found is if you say this is the right thing to do, it has almost no impact at all. And if you start talking about this is going to make your journalism better and more popular, then people find it a much more appealing thing. So when you were saying diversity is not about political correctness, that kind of resonated because our experience is once you start framing it in terms of the quality of your journalism, people are much more likely to be enthused. The second thing is on the BBC, so we now you don't have to have a degree to apply to the BBC, so that's a big change in the last couple of years. And they're also no longer doing straightforward interviews in the way that they used to before, so that the way we assess candidates is changing, and that seems to be having an effect on the diversity of our intake. And my third point was I had a conversation with someone involved in admissions at Cambridge University the other day, and they were saying they've completely changed their culture to try and make it more appealing to a diverse intake, but people aren't applying because they still think Cambridge University is what it was 20 years ago. And it seems to me for big established organizations, whether it's Cambridge University or the BBC or lots of other media organizations, there's a job that you were talking about of actually of outreach, of going to places where they may not even think to apply before you even worry about what happens when they do apply, because if they don't apply, it doesn't really matter if you haven't changed. So those are the 3 points I was going to make, but my question is, I often feel a kind of revolutionary fire in my belly for these things, but I'm not convinced that is the best way of changing the culture I work in. But I'm interested to hear from the 4 of you. Change means some people can't do the roles they used to do, and that can be quite uncomfortable, especially for white men. How do you address that discomfort? How do you try and take those people with you? Maybe you don't need to.
First?
Well, it's I think this is a question that will happen in big organizations particularly. The work that I do is when I try to stimulate and support cross-border journalism, I have the experience that we have mixed groups there. The purpose is always good journalism, and it is, as a methodology, it is young, it's 10, 15, 20 years old, and it is a mixed bunch of people who did it. Now that cross-border journalism as a method is established, we all know Panama Papers, everybody nods, and we all know football leagues, and everybody nods, so people know it. The interesting thing is, it is now moving from the foundation-supported experimental phase into the mainstream. So all of a sudden, there's something also for the formerly lone wolf white males. So they're integrated into these teams. And an interesting team I'm thinking of right now, and there is particularly one formerly lone wolf white male, big shot, nice position, super salary, I'm sure, fixed position at a very nice medium. And he works in a team where one of the colleagues, he lives in Western Europe, and one of the colleagues is a journalist in exile from Turkey, freelancing. When she works, a woman, when she works out of a basement, which is pretty dark, because that's where her office is. And so when these two are in a team and they discuss, and she is a self-confident person, so she takes the discussion, and they have a coordinator who is very good at balancing such discussions within the cross-border team. They address these questions, and it's the world that I know, the cross-border journalism, the cross-border investigative journalism that I'm familiar with. It's a process of many, many, many small steps where they take these discussions, and the white male realizes, yes, there is a different world, and takes it in. It is slow, but then, you know, they realize it's there, and they embrace it at the end of the day. And then together, the team wins the awards.
And you know, thank you for the question, but if I may share a small anecdote, do you know how utterly uncomfortable I felt when the guy in the newsroom yells at me? And I'm like, it's my first, like, honestly, it's my first day as editor-in-chief of a show, of an 8-hour news show at the German National Radio. And this one guy who was like all over the place and yelling at me. You know how discomfortable I felt? So honestly, like my feelings with white men who might have to step back a little, it's not...
So I'm aware that as I ask that question, you can think, well, listen, the last thing we should be worrying about is how uncomfortable white men. So I get that completely. I'm only asking it as a tactical point of view.
Sure,
from a tactical point of view, not from the point of view of on the top of our list of people to worry about should be white men. I get that shouldn't be the case, but as someone who runs a change project and a diversity project at the BBC, I know that unless I get some of these white men on board, it's going to be a lot harder than if I don't. So I'm just asking it from a tactical point of view, not because I think it's the most important thing.
Yeah, totally with this quality, with this focusing on we want to make journalism better, I think this is totally the way to go. But honestly, I do acknowledge this question, and I think it's important. And yes, I also know we need we also need the white guys to kind of be allies in this. But still, I would also really push for, this is not the very first question I'd like to address. It's a question of priorities, I think. But we need them too, but they're not the first.
And also, I think it's And even though some of us might want it to be a sort of a revolution, I don't think that's going to be, okay, one day to the other it changed. Now the newsroom has to change from one to the other, and then 90 of the white men has to be sacked, and then we're going to get more people. I don't think that's going to be the way. It's going to be a very slow process, and it's not even going to be per se that right now the editorial team is going to change or the management is going to change. It's going to be so slow that I hope it's going to be faster. So I don't think that's one of the crises the white man facing. And so it's a gradual, and I think it's also the point when everybody feels that this is the move that we have to make. And everybody consciously know that's necessary, so I think it will be easier on them as well, because they know that's what their audiences wants. That's what and also I think it happens quite often when in corporations you make a necessary management change and staff change according to your audiences and according to your customers. And as you mentioned, actually having a diversity, if you say it's the right thing to do, it's harder to change, right? But if you propose it to people, it's actually a financial incentive, which is true, right? And it's also, when it's come to content, especially the younger generations, they relate it better when you have a diverse background, diverse production. And so it's also a matter of how you keep your audiences and viewers on track. It's easier also when you, for example, talking to the board, addressing the whole staff. That's a necessary move, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also it's going to make us more money. So I think it's also a different perspective to talk about it.
One last thing for that. Why should the white men be discomforted if they are already supporting this cause? What I mean here is not necessarily all men are against this change, and not necessarily also all women are with this change. We have women, even women of color, who benefits from this system, or they learned how to deal with this system, so they will be against any change, against their benefits. Also men, so I don't think it's a war against the white man, or it's a war against this. It's a war against the concept. We have a problem with the concept, and if you are standing with us on our side, then we all fight the concept. If you are with the concept somehow, as a white man, as a man of color, as a woman of color, as a white woman, it doesn't matter. You are with the concept, we fight you.
Partial revolution. We have one more question here in the back, please.
Is this working bad, or do I have to do anything? Okay, wonderful. Romy, yes, I'm not a journalist, but a philosopher, and I've worked on unconscious bias a little bit, and I was just going to, it's not really a question, it's just something that I wanted to add. We heard about several incentives, like monetary incentives, moral incentives, but also incentives from, it makes journalism better. There's actually this one study in particular that comes to my mind that investigated which incentives actually work for the people from diverse backgrounds in the organizations. When people are hired for the wrong reasons, then they get the bad projects, the projects that don't, that no one wants in the organization, and they can't really show their best, and so it's actually to their worse if they work in an organization that hired them for the wrong reasons. And this particular study that I have in mind showed that moral reasons are bad reasons, financial reasons are very bad reasons, and the only good reason to hire people from diverse backgrounds is actually that their perspective matters to people in the organization, and it could be shown that when their perspective genuinely matters to people in the organization, they thrive, and the organization thrives financially. But if they are hired for financial reasons, then they don't thrive, and the organization doesn't thrive financially. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind, and also when it comes to the last question, how do we actually frame diversity efforts in an organization, I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
please join us in here after the panel, that we could take down the study and we would share it through the
I have
Twitter
to look it
account.
up, though.
Okay, we'll share it. We'll share it. And Chen would like to respond.
I just responded very fast. You mentioned that financial reasons are not right reason, because it should be like this person hired should be respected because of his or her perspective. And I think, unfortunately, we live in a society that financial reasons matter a lot, and people hire you because of financial reasons and would actually listen to you because it matters. You connect to their audiences. So I think all these different perspectives actually translated to each other in a way. So just a short response to that.
Do we have one final question? I know you were waiting for a long time already. Shall we take one more question? Is there a microphone?
Is there a microphone?
Here in the second row. Final question. We will stop on time.
Hi, my name is Amanda. I'm a journalist from the States, now based in the UK, but on the topic of white privilege and people who their feelings shouldn't be at the top of the list. As a white woman, like, what, especially women of color, like, what do you say to, like, your white women colleagues who, like, when I look at diversity and sort of journalism and those awful numbers about the newsrooms, like, sometimes I feel like I don't actually have a role in the fight and I should be stepping back and uplifting women of color over myself because they have fought longer and harder and you know, need it more than I do. And so what do you say to your white women as far as how we can properly sort of fit into the struggle and be supportive in the right way?
In a discussion, me and my colleagues, we were talking about this case in the German media when white journalists have published something with, like, it was totally faked, and unfortunately he have done that, and they discovered that, and the two colleagues who were discovering that were with an immigrant background, and they used to do that because I think we were talking about that. We analyzed that they used to do that to question everything happening in the newsroom more than anyone else, because they were always under the spot. The role of the white woman or any, I don't like here to separate genders, if anyone in the newsroom is to support the others when they come up and they say, well, I see this is wrong, or I'm not feeling comfortable with that. And then you believe them first. We need people to believe us when we say something like that, because first thing that said to us, it's your feelings, it's not facts, it's feelings, it's speculations. And no, it's not speculations. We also are journalists, we are humans, we observe, we see. So first thing, believe them, to support them, and then start to analyze with them, stand with them, and actually this is a big step. The problem is the companies or capitalism is tending to make us always separate individuals, and that kills this support system that a woman of color can get.
May I say something also there? I think it is really important that for white women, for white males, for that sake, that we don't allow these questions to divide us, because at the end of the day, there is so much important journalism to be done. There is enough work for everyone, right? Yes. So let's not allow this to divide us. Let's stand together, as you say. Let's praise each other. Let's stand together to do good journalism. Because if we split each other, if we split our newsrooms, yes, there are structural problems. But where is the real power? Where is the real problem? So there is enough good journalism to be done to stand together and do it together.
Thank you very much for these wonderful final words. Everybody matters, every role matters. It's not about color, it's not about gender. Only together we can unbias the news, and I hope we gave some food for thought to do this. Thank you. Thank you.